speculation, Your Honor. I just, right now, collecting words, but that's part of the problem that I have also. I think I'll start talking and I just feel faint. So I apologize to you, Your Honor, for bringing this case even into your court. Again, thank you everyone, and I'm sorry for everything. I know the true judgment day is when God comes and judges me. But I've been reading the Bible and praying, and I've been asking for forgiveness. And due to the fact that I do have a sexual addiction, I don't know how He's going to judge me. I don't know. The comment that the lady made for the DeJesus family at the end, that was uncalled for. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you victims. Please find it in your hearts to forgive me. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Castro, you have before you your plea agreement, and if you recall on page 10, part of the agreement was that you would execute all necessary documents and perform all acts to transfer right, title, and interest in the real property to 2207 Seymour Avenue in Cleveland to the Cuyahoga County Land Reutilization Corporation, the land bank. So the other day after the plea hearing, that's what you did. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You signed all the papers?
Yes.
All right, and you understand that you are not entitled to seek any profit. You've agreed not to seek any profit from this matter, correct?
That's correct. Say it again, I'm sorry.
You have agreed that you will not seek any profit from this. In other words, you're not going to be writing a book and receiving funds. You won't be licensing anything.
Right. That is correct.
The only people that may in the future receive any benefit from this will be the victims. Is that clear?
Yes, it's clear.
And Ms. Knight, thank you for your remarkable restraint during that statement. Mr. Castro, you had several times, both during the plea colloquy and then again today, mentioned that you don't feel that you're a violent person. Perhaps you're not fully understanding revised code section 2971. It talks about what is a violent sex offense, and that includes the charge of rape, and you've pled guilty to a number of those, hundreds of counts. It also defines sexually violent offense, means a violent sex offense for which a person was convicted of or pled guilty to with a sexual motivation spec. And then it talks about a sexually violent predator. So by operation of law, the rape and such would then constitute a sexually violent offense, and you've pled guilty to that and been found guilty of it at your plea. And a sexually violent offense and the likelihood to engage in the future in one or more sexually violent offenses qualifies a person as a sexually violent predator. And here under 2971.01 H2, C, D, and E, where they talk about the available information or evidence suggests that the person chronically commits offenses with a sexual motivation, you'd have to admit that that happened here by virtue of all the rape charges. That the person has committed one or more offenses in which the person has tortured or engaged in ritualistic acts with one or more victims. That seems to fit here too. Also, the person has committed one or more offenses in which one or more victims were physically harmed to the degree that the particular victim's life was in jeopardy, and that most prominently occurred with Ms. Knight. So there are legal reasons that your attorneys, I'm sure, have considered and discussed with you why, although you may not like the wording or the terminology of the revised code, it fits. Okay?
Okay, I just,
It may be unpleasant to you.
It's confusing me, yeah, the violent part, it makes it sound like if I force myself onto them, that can happen.
Well, that has,
Physically.
by virtue of your plea, that's what you did. You pled guilty to that, and by virtue of your plea, when you rape someone, that's what it means. So, Mr. Castro, in sentencing you and all others to come before this court on felony matters, and of course there's one misdemeanor as well, but in coming before this court on felony matters, I have to comply with the felony sentencing statutes. The overall purpose is to punish the offender and protect the public from future crime by the offender and others, using the minimum sanctions that the court determines accomplish those purposes without imposing an unnecessary burden on state or local government resources. In imposing sentence, a court must consider the need for incapacitation, deterrence, rehabilitation, and restitution. I have to come up with a sentence for you that's commensurate with and not demeaning to the seriousness of your conduct, its impact on the victims, and a sentence that's consistent with sentences for similar crimes by similar offenders. And also the sentence must not be based upon your race, ethnicity, gender, or religion. One issue here in terms of proportionality, which we'll get to later, but I just look back in the cases I've had, there have been none in this that have a scope approaching this, but in terms of harm to a victim, they're similar, although your misconduct here far exceeds the scope and duration of the defendants I'm going to mention. But I note that in Kevin Dominick's case, which was 300-286, I imposed 2 consecutive life sentences for him. And for Mr. Yakov, in case 450218, he received a sentence of 36 years based upon his conduct. But those did not involve kidnapping and torture and deprivation and such over a number of years. The harm to the victims was, of course, still great because they were raped in those 2 instances by their dads, but nothing like this. So in this matter, considerations or indicators that your conduct is more serious under 29.12b, based upon the information available to the court. All of this was organized, used deception, used chains and other means to hold captive 3 young women and ultimately a young child. And there was a certain strategy involved. The connection between all of these individuals was the fact that they all were friends with one or more of your daughters or your son. And that was your entree, and that's how this evolved. And you indicated that you had to do this because you suffer from sex addiction, but at the same time that this plan was going into operation with this night, you had a girlfriend who was not harmed, was not abused. You had a apparently or outwardly normal relationship with Miss Roldan. Do you recall her?
Yes.
Okay. So you are able to choose who you wish to victimize. There was serious physical harm. Miss Knight suffered on many occasions, according to the information. The others were, as well as Miss Knight, showing signs of malnourishment and such. There was serious psychological harm. She touched upon the captivity issue and how liberating it is now. We also heard some information about medical care and how they didn't even want to come out of the house because they, at that point, 2 of the women had been almost programmed to stay there. Not because they wanted to, but because they were afraid of what the repercussions would be if they did leave, that you would then see this as a test that they failed and hurt them. I think even without the testimony of the expert from Michigan, any person in America would understand that a person who is held captive for between 9 and 11 years, sexually assaulted and such, will hold and have a serious psychological harm, as well as the physical harm. There's also economic harm. I know Miss Berry was coming from work, and the others were all young, and they had an opportunity to work, but you deprived them of that. And not just the wages, you also deprived them of the opportunity to be out in public, to socialize, to be with their families, all those other things that come under, maybe not under economic harm, but then back to the psychological harm. Others indicate your conduct is more serious. The age. Jocelyn was a very young child, and yet she grew up in a household where doors were locked, people were chained up, windows were covered, people were not allowed to come over and visit. It was all, I would believe that Inspector Moore from DRC would agree that the conditions at your house could never be tolerated in any Ohio prison.
Excuse me, Your Honor, my daughter never seen anyone being chained up.
Okay.
That happened early in the years.
Well, also the age of the victims is important here. They were young women, teenagers, and they could not have imagined that an adult would trick them and imprison them and enslave them and abuse them. You took advantage of their naivete and the fact that they were pleasant individuals that could not fathom this type of behavior. The relationship issue is important here. Your daughter, you have exposed a young child to unbelievable conditions. In your mind, there was harmony and a happy household. I'm not sure there's anybody else in America that will agree with you. And there were many crimes committed in the vicinity of your young daughter. The women were still being raped and deprived of food and living in difficult physical conditions. Indicates your conduct is less serious under 29.12c. You have indicated that you were a victim of sexual abuse. That's possible. I don't know. I do know, though, that those who are sexually abused, there is a tendency of some to act out and to abuse others, but there are many, and I suspect more, who move on from that and live a healthy life, that they are not abusing others. You indicate that you do have a mental illness, but I'm not aware of any of that. As you've appeared here, you've always answered questions and understood what's going on. You just made a calculated decision in this instance to do wrong. And if anything, to me, you exhibit antisocial personality disorder. I'm not a psychological expert. Certainly don't have the credentials of those who spoke here today, but you have extreme narcissism, and it seems rather pervasive. Indicators that you are more likely to reoffend. Well, prior to this, there were no convictions. Now, you said that your wife would irritate you. She wouldn't stop talking, and then you would respond. Well, my understanding from the records is that she suffered a broken nose twice. She had broken teeth, and she otherwise was abused, but they were never followed through as a conviction. And that's unfortunate, and it's something we talk about with all family members who are victims of abuse, whether they're a man, a woman, a child, a young adult. No one is allowed to have violence visited upon them in their home or at their school. I wish that she had prosecuted for her sake, and I know now that she has passed, but victims need to stand up for themselves so that the abuse stops, and so that those who are abusers, when possible, will receive proper treatment and redirection. And that's what a court is for. You have resources available to you. The Rape Crisis Center is open to anyone who is a victim of sexual abuse. So if you had wanted to, you could have contacted them. Your home is also near Recovery Resources. There's Murders Taylor.